So welcome to episode 3 of Talent Hub TV. I'm here with Sean, Gary and Richard from Mav3rik. Excited to have the guys here today to hear more about what they're doing in the Salesforce space and a little bit about their backgrounds and plans for Mav3rik moving forward. So for the benefit of viewers, can you give us a little bit of an intro about yourselves and who you are, where you're from and how you're here today, I guess?
Yeah, alright, thanks Ben. I'm one of the co-founders of Mav3rik, Salesforce technical architects and a director here in Sydney. So I started out my Salesforce career around 7 years ago at this stage. Moved over to Australia almost 4 years ago to date. And working closely with the co-founders and partners here today.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm Gary. I've been in the Salesforce space now for about 10 years. Got started back in the UK, almost straight out of university, and moved here to Australia 4 years ago and joined these guys at the start of this year. In my position, I'm mostly doing architecture, although sometimes get my hands dirty with the code. So that's my position really, to help build the company and build the architecture practice and deliver projects.
So my background is I came by way of Siebel sort of CRM, so I did a lot of that work in APAC for the last 15 or so years before I then moved into the ecosystem. So I actually got involved in Salesforce in 2011, so joined Salesforce in Melbourne as the second sort of technical architect there. And been working on it in that space ever since. And co-founded the company with Sean just late last year, end of last year. So basically, here now and just starting to form this new team.
Sure. So late last year, Mav3rik was off the ground. But how did you all how did you cross paths? How did Mav3rik come about?
Yeah, so I got to work closely with Sean probably about 3-4 years ago when I was still running the mobile and emerging tech practice in Salesforce services. So we got to a couple of engagements and worked together in there and realized we had similar sort of interests and motivations as individuals, and basically got along. I think Gary and I sort of met earlier than that actually, just from interactions in technical architecture space, as well as I think we collaborated in a few things as well. So that's what led to, I guess, us collaborating and interacting together and actually building up this thing. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so obviously you mentioned you're from a Siebel background originally. What about the other two? So how did you fall into Salesforce and what attracted you to?
So I actually originally worked for Salesforce, finished up a software engineering degree and master's in Ireland, and actually got introduced to Salesforce by a neighbour of mine and a director within Salesforce. During that time, entering in out of uni, I was involved in delivering technical pre-sales pieces of work as well. So I got exposure on a lot of enterprise deals there. And that's when I started. Salesforce was had a kind of a startup culture. It was fantastic, and stuck with that for 3 years before I moved over to Australia.
Okay, yourself?
Yeah, so I was a global global SI, and on a graduate scheme there. I finished uni and had my final year project in and thought, what do I do now? So at that point, there were people from companies coming around, promoting their graduate schemes, and there was one in particular. That sounds actually like what I do. I get to work in different technologies, different projects, different customers, and I can kind of figure out as I go along, which is a great way of getting the exposure, because straight out of uni, you don't necessarily know what is out there. Sure. And then sort of that program designed to sort of last for sort of a year to 2 years, depending on what happens to you and the projects you work on and where you can go. And at that time, they were starting up a SaaS practice. They'd had people from their Oracle business division realised that Siebel was having a bit of a hard time, and this thing called Salesforce, and they got in early. And I got speaking with those guys, and it seemed like the right fit. It just felt exciting and new, and I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, and Richard, you're Siebel and then straight into Salesforce themselves.
That's right. Yeah, so I worked for Oracle for a time, probably about close to 5 years before I actually moved over to Salesforce. So I was part of the sort of the CRM practice, and I was heavily involved in the Telstra transformation and a few other clients in Melbourne. But yeah, ultimately it just made sense to actually move and sort of go into the cloud computing space. And I mean, Siebel back in the day, I'm sure Gary knows this as well, it's the best of breed sort of CRM application, right? It was an on-premise, but everybody else was sort of adopting it as an application. So it just made more sense to sort of move into the cloud eventually and then sort of turn into Salesforce.
And not to flag too much, but Siebel guys and Enojas make great Salesforce. The best Salesforce architect I know is actually ex-Siebel. I usually find difficult. You're ex-Siebel? Okay, right, I kind of know where we stand. It's usually a good indicator.
So just to touch on that point, is that from an architecture perspective, or would you say like a Siebel consultant, or also is a good person to transition into Salesforce?
Yeah, definitely architecture. A lot of the functional capabilities are similar, again, having come from a CRM sort of domain. But the technology is slightly different, right? Because it's on-premise and cloud, and there's a lot more web sort of technologies involved with Salesforce. But yeah, definitely a lot of things that you can repurpose from your background and knowledge of Siebel into Salesforce. I think the other thing for me was really the exposure to, because Siebel is being adopted as an enterprise software sort of solution for your clients, large enterprises. I think that served me well into that transition as well. So,
okay. And did you anticipate the growth back then when you made the jump into Salesforce? Did you see that kind of it taking off the way it has?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I first moved, I was really impressed with the software, the product, and how customers were really adopting it, and the feedback that they were giving from Salesforce. So I think I knew it was just a matter of time before they break through and actually get adopted in a more sort of mainstream sort of space and adopted by large enterprises. So yeah.
So that was obviously a few years ago now. So how has the platform evolved? And
significantly, I'm sure everybody shares the same sentiment. There's just so much more in the platform now in terms of capability. It used to be just Sales Cloud and a bit of Service Cloud, but now the platform itself has so much functionality, and the clouds have increased to 11 or so clouds now. So yeah, it's just so much things in there. I mean, Gary and I have been doing sort of architecture for a while, and our CTAs, but even ourselves are still learning new things every day. So yeah, there's just so much in there.
So what are you most excited about? Because it's not slowing down, right? The evolution and progression of the platform is out of control. So what's exciting for you and in the coming months?
I think I was at Dreamforce a couple of years ago, and I can't remember which talk I was at, but you could join the dots and you realise that, okay, they're preparing for scale. So at the moment, Salesforce, obviously the scale of their data centres and one of their pods and all the customers that they're serving, it's huge, right? But I sat down like, wow, you've got big objects coming in. And I think it might have been when Einstein Analytics, I guess it was then, was announced, or the year after. And you can just sort of start to see these things across the platform, and you still see it today, things like platform events. And I also see like how open Salesforce engineering are. They have a Medium channel which they post on their stuff, and they talk about the technology that underpins all that stuff, and it's talking vast scale. So for me, it's at the moment people might still think of it as CRM, sales service, that kind of thing, but kind of where can we go with a platform that can scale that huge numbers that we. I don't know if Richard had the same experience at my first projects that I worked on, delivered, go off the limits, having to work within certain confines, and there wasn't really anything you could do about it. But there always will be government limits, but there'll be other things you can do now that just you wouldn't have been able to do 5 years ago.
Okay. Yourself?
And they've got it for nearly most use cases. It's a scalable application. Heroku, Salesforce on Heroku, for instance, very scalable application that we're seeing a lot of traction here in Australia at the moment for that, which is very exciting. And whether it's building a mobile solution or a highly scalable web application as well that will connect seamlessly into Salesforce, there's almost a product for most use cases for businesses.
Sure. I was going to touch on Heroku because I know you're big fans, right? I see a lot of your content on LinkedIn, and I think every time I see something Heroku, it's generally you guys that have shared it. So for people that maybe don't know what Heroku is or the power of Heroku or the use cases for that, could you kind of give a little bit of insight?
Who you want to take?
I'm sure you can
all answer, but yeah. Well, it's a platform as a service, right? So it's another offering from Salesforce, as Sean mentioned, that allows you to sort of scale more than, especially when catering for B2C sort of use cases.
Sure.
The good thing about Heroku is it supports sort of multiple languages in terms of development. So people that don't necessarily work on your traditional core sort of development, whether it be Apex or Visual Force or any of those things, and have backgrounds in Node.js or PHP or Rails, can apply those sort of knowledge and skills and deploy an app in Heroku.
Okay.
So yeah, that's I guess one of the advantages there. I don't know if you want to add anything to it.
Yeah, most definitely. And now, like, more and more, it's getting tightly coupled to Salesforce with its integrations, such as Heroku Connect. So, like, in a matter of minutes, you can actually push data or pull data from Salesforce to this scalable application that isn't just on a per-user license model. You basically buy power. So, again, as Richard said, it's very suited to the B2C applications. Sure. It's quite exciting.
It's scalable in a different way to Salesforce. With Salesforce, it's kind of about scaling out with users. You can put more people in and you can put them in a role hierarchy somewhere and they can carry on using that application, whereas Heroku's more on the web application side that Richard was talking about, and you get a sort of whole range of options that you can kind of, okay, this is a very small, lightweight process that runs infrequently, so we're going to have a very small set of compute power, a very small local dyno, to something that's going to require longer running times, more CPU power. You can buy a bigger dyno, and you scale accordingly. Same with the Postgres service, which is essentially storage as a service. It's a database as a service. So again, if you're going to have a database that's got a lot of users and a lot of queries against it, then you can buy a very big instance. Yep. You'll get a beefier machine with more RAM and so on and so forth. Likewise, you can scale down to something a lot smaller if you've just got a blog that nobody reads and just posting about it, whatever you're into.
It's important to know they definitely complement each other.
That's right.
Salesforce and Heroku. Sure. You get the power of the CRM. You can push that data in, report on it, do whatever you want. Have that Salesforce as your management platform, basically, while having Heroku there as your scalable platform to host these applications as well. So.
Another thing I should touch on, the MuleSoft acquisition. What are your thoughts on that?
That's great. I think everybody was sort of expecting it, to be honest. I mean, I personally did. It was just bound to happen just because of the fact that, again, there's multiple solutions now. There's multiple sort of systems you typically integrate with when you're deploying a Salesforce solution. So, and MuleSoft is always one of the go-to sort of middleware for those things. So, I think I wasn't surprised when that happened. It was, definitely.
Well, so I was. Well, partly because, again, I was at Dreamforce and I've been to a number of booths to check out some of the new products, and they were all from acquisitions, and they all had ways of pulling in data, for example, from SAP. And I thought, there must be so much stuff across Salesforce, what Salesforce now owns, that they could probably put a product together. But having said that, I was surprised. It still makes sense. Integration is becoming ever more important, and I think Salesforce will do a really good job of just making it not necessarily easy. Integrations, always one of the bigger challenges you have, but certainly about making it a little bit more every day. Yeah. So I'm really interested to see what they're going to do with it. And again, the other thing was that Salesforce had a history of helping partners grow businesses, and then when the time comes, acquiring and saying, okay, now we want to make this a core part of the platform. And for the acquisitions they've done in the past, there was a relationship to CRM, whereas MuleSoft feels much more aggressive.
Sure.
And Salesforce wouldn't do it for the sake of fancy buying a company today that's going to buy a big one. So I'm really interested to see how that strategy is going to play out and what they're going to deliver with it.
Sure.
I mean, it's definitely in line with the aggressive growth plans, right? So I think the only way they can really achieve those really high sort of targets, and I wouldn't need to mention the numbers here, but I think it's really just making sure that they're catering for the large enterprise sort of deployments, right? Implementations, and really having that layer actually allows them to do that. So.
Sure. Okay. So back to Mav3rik now. So you've been around since the turn of the year, and what would you say? What's the gap that you're looking to fill in the market?
Well, I mean, for us, I mean, personally, it was a motivation for us to actually do something and challenge ourselves even more, and that's sort of what led to us starting the company. But at the same time, we knew, I guess, that our backgrounds and skills, have a role to play in growing the ecosystem even more. So for us, again, we've got strong CRM backgrounds, but we also have strong sort of platform backgrounds.
Sure.
From the teams that we've led in the past, for me internally at Salesforce and for these guys, I think we definitely had a lot of exposure to the platform side and not just deploying this CRM business application. So I think that's sort of partly our focus as a company. We're not necessarily saying we're not going to do the traditional sales and service sort of implementations. I think there's still room for that.
Sure.
But I think we can offer more.
Okay.
And I guess for us, it's also just again in general, we want to give back to the community. So it's about helping increase the capacity overall, especially in APAC, which we're struggling with right now. But it's also about raising the bar a little bit because the scale needs to be there, but you also still have to maintain the quality of the resources that are working in this space, right?
Sure.
So I think that's what we're trying to contribute to.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen obviously you've grown quickly. You've got, I think you mentioned 11 or so people already, and when we've had interactions around recruitment, you haven't necessarily been looking for just your standard Salesforce developer, or you've been a bit more flexible and looked at different skill sets that you can bring into the market. So why has that been your approach, and how have you found that approach, I guess?
Sure.
Personally, I see the market under-resourced at the moment. So I see, from my experience, I see a lot of developers, they don't necessarily know about Salesforce or want to become Salesforce developers, but with the toolings such as DX and, as I said, Heroku, once you get those people on board and with a good team behind them as well, they really see the benefit of actually becoming Salesforce developers.
So what's a lot of our clients are resistant, and I guess it's because they don't have people like yourself. So like an end user company, that they don't have the resources to be able to train and guide these people that they're transitioning. So we touched on Siebel earlier being a good kind of training ground for people moving into Salesforce, but people are resistant to do that, pull them in. So how have you found people coming from a non-Salesforce background? What's the lead time to get these guys up and firing?
Well, I suppose it's just about the support they get as well, and they'll get very strong technical resource from the top.
Sure.
We work as a close team together. Yeah. So if someone comes on, they'll be onboarded slowly, given the training. We don't just have a sales-driven culture, we have a very technical-driven culture where we want people to come on board to achieve, whether it's their certifications, their badging, and just to build up that momentum internally that they'll succeed.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, to that point, I think when we formed the team, the plan has always been to form a core team of really strong resources. I mean, Sean and I and Gary, come from, again, technical architecture backgrounds, and we knew that we were not going to sort of just pull everybody into the team. It was just, again, building around that with the people that are outside of the ecosystem, actually then mentoring and coaching them through.
Sure.
For me personally, when I moved to Salesforce, how I actually learned was I just got thrown into the deep end straight away. So, I know for some people that might not necessarily be effective, but to me, getting thrown, into a project straight away without necessarily going through an onboarding process or a full-fledged sort of training program or whatever, I think that just forced me to sort of actually pick it up and learn and really, try and
sink or swim.
Exactly. So I think that's to me that's one effective way of actually bringing people on board. with the right support structure.
Yeah,
right.
I think that's the key, right? Because you don't want to throw someone in and they sink and then So, okay.
But, I think that the other thing that plays into it is the personal motivation of the individual. Right? So what we look for is the right mindset, the right sort of reasons that they want to join us for, and if we see that there's that motivation in there, then it helps because you're going to keep pushing yourselves to do better, to do more, to actually learn what you don't know. Right?
I agree. It's not just about their skill set they come in with. Most definitely, it's around their passion and motivation.
Sure.
And with a good team behind them, they'll succeed very quickly.
And you mentioned about people maybe not always wanting to transition into Salesforce. So we see a lot of people wanting to make a move, but not always the most technical people. So why do you think that is? Why do you think some of the kind of heavyweight coders out there in other languages don't always see Salesforce as the coolest platform?
I mean, I think part of it is, like Sean mentioned, the tooling. It wasn't really there before, and the reason why DX came along is they want to enhance that developer experience to make it really more palatable, I guess, for the pure sort of developers to actually adopt.
Sure.
And have a lot more sort of seamless integration to your open source sort of technologies and working with VCS and CI/CD tooling as well. So that helps a lot. And I think slowly people are getting more aware and becoming more familiar with it. But at the same time, Salesforce has always been known as initially a low-code platform, right? So that serves more of those citizen developers, the non-technical, sort of developers. So, I guess there's a bit of that in playing into it as well. So,
I think as well as part of the cultural thing, Salesforce and its solutions are opinionated. In the past, when Salesforce said about how much quicker app development is with the Salesforce platform, a lot of that's down to the fact that this is the way that you do things. Okay, if you want to do it, and it's got the tools to do those things really, really well. For some people, they want control over every aspect. So for a very hardcore developer who's used to, reading about some new library on Hacker News and working out how they can put it into their latest project or what they're going to do with it at the weekend, that can be a little bit alienating. You come in and it's like, this is the language you use.
Sure.
This is how you go about building things, and if you need to do these things, then you do them this way. So I think that's probably why some of the resistance is, and it comes back to sort of a cultural fit. People who can recognise that, okay, I can give up on some of those choices, but I'm going to be working in a technology that's highly sought after by businesses because that's what businesses care about. They care about outcomes,
Sure.
And therefore, get delivering on those outcomes quicker. So if I can trade that bit for, then I can make a career out of that.
So do you see the traditional skill sets changing now? Can a Salesforce developer just be an Apex coder, or do they need experience with other languages now to stay relevant, I guess?
Yeah, look, and I think that's a big mistake that I've seen in the past. Salesforce, there's not just a Salesforce developer. There's now introduction of the Lightning, which has been around for quite a while, but it's got significant improvements. You have a front-end developer and your back-end developer for Apex, or that combined together.
Okay, so you think that's been a mistake of people, that they haven't been perhaps adaptable enough to pick up these new languages?
I don't think it was a limitation, but you need that mix. You need that mix of a front-end developer and a back-end developer, or else two combined to actually create these user-friendly, convincing applications.
Okay.
Of course, like that.
And what about the more functional roles? Do you see those changing with the platform changes, or is the...
I think the ones that come from a CRM background, whether it be SQL or some other CRM product, I think they can easily still transition to your sales and service sort of cloud roles. But what we're seeing more now in the platform space is that, again, use cases that are not just sales and service, right?
Sure.
So anybody who's done pretty much a functional role before that is gathering requirements for a specific use case, should be able to actually, pick up the Salesforce as a technology to sort of deploy that with. So,
okay.
I think the functional roles have changed quite a bit as well. Like, it used to be you'd have your functional people do the sales and the service side, and you'd have your developers do the advanced customizations that you couldn't do as a functional consultant without having to code. Now, obviously, the product set is so much more expanded. Field service lighting, CPQ, and more and more CPQ billing. These are all things that functional consultants may have to get across, and certainly for me, when I went to Salesforce, there was Sales Cloud, and Service Cloud was, being ramped up internally at Salesforce, so we've been encouraged to do things there. But and it felt like for a long time that's what you sort of operate in sales service platform. Now you've got these sort of new products coming in, and with it addressing more business scenarios and having the whole point of the functional consultant is to not just understand the product, but understand how that product interacts in an environment. So, good luck, functional consultants. You've got some learning to do, but it's an interesting time for them as well.
For sure.
I think the last thing I want to add is, again, it serves you well if you're a functional person, if you actually slowly try and pick up a bit of the technical side as well. So just not necessarily coding it yourself, but actually understanding what needs to be coded and what doesn't.
Sure.
Just getting across that as well would definitely help.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that Mav3rik had the second highest number of CTAs in Australia. Is that correct?
Outside of the Salesforce services team, I guess.
From the partners.
I would think so. Yeah.
And pretty much every technical and functional person that we speak to now has the aspiration to be a CTA. It's on everyone's kind of roadmap and plan. And we feel, or we get told often by people in the market that they have to work in big enterprise projects or work for a big SI in order to achieve that goal. Do you think that's true? Is that the case?
No, I think ultimately what it comes down to, it's very clear now that with the way the program's set up is that there are specific areas that you need to know back to front. And so if you can get exposure on projects that are in those areas or include those areas, don't have to have everything, but you might be doing one project at one part of the year that's very tricky around sharing and security, and another time you may be doing something where there's huge volume. Sometimes you'll have projects that involve both. I don't think those are exclusively the domain of big customers and big SIs. Certainly, I have worked at, this is going out of LinkedIn, so people will be able to click through and see who I am and say, hang on a second, he's got a long history of working with SIs, huge SIs, but it's not just about that. There are customers out there that are doing tricky things, and so there are opportunities to do that. Of course, the bigger customers are going to have more of them going on at the same time, and they do tend to partner up with bigger SIs because they need the scale, but that's not to say that there's no opportunity out there, because there absolutely is.
Okay.
The other thing to add is really it's not the size of the project. It's again the exposure that you get from the different domains that you need to be aware of across to actually get through the CTA credential, right? So I think again, like from my experience, it's about sort of working on the slightly smaller projects, but actually working on all those sort of different domains and actually handling identity and integration myself, and being really hands-on, but at the same time being able to engage with the architects from the client side. So I think having that exposure actually is what you need to sort of seek out in terms of experience, and that doesn't necessarily just come out of big engagements and big clients. So it's it can come out from any medium-sized ones as well. So.
Sure. And just to add to that, actually, because there were, as I was studying for the CTA, there were parts that I hadn't done in a while, and I wanted to go in and just sort of get my hands dirty with it. And you can spin these things up, and you don't need to have an instance of SAP, and an instance of Salesforce, and an instance of Active Directory to set up single sign-on.
Sure.
Just get 2 developer roles and get them working, and you can read an article. There's great articles out there, great blog post content explaining the SAML flow, and you can read about that stuff, and that's great. But actually, if you take advantage of those resources, you can actually try some of this stuff for yourself, and actually, so these are some of the things. And CTA certification or not, that's going to help you in your career right away. Being able to say, here, actually, I have set up single sign-on between. Google than my Salesforce instance.
Okay.
But if you do work for a big team, a big SI, for example, I think it's really up to you to put your hand up to take on things that you haven't done before.
Sure.
So if you've had a lot of work doing integration and you keep just doing integration, it doesn't really help you, right? So I think putting your hand up and actually taking on new things and challenging yourself to be across the other domains.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be a good way to sort of prepare for it.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So, what would you like Mav3rik to be known as in the market? What's when people talk about Mav3rik, what do you want them to be talking about? John.
Yeah, we want to be known to push boundaries on the technical sense for a lot of our solutions as well. Some partners, they might shy away from more complex mobile connected, Salesforce connected solutions, or as I said again, Heroku solutions. We want to be known as these guys are very comfortable taking on these pieces of work. We also want to be known to have really a great culture, not just this sales culture, but a culture that's actually going to promote the growth of our internal employees to really succeed to the maximum level, and so they can achieve what, be it the CTA or any other streams they want to go after. We want to be known in the market that we're a close team together and we help each other succeed.
And not just internally, I guess. I mean, part of the motivation again is to still be able to give back to the community, right?
Yeah.
Like we've gotten to the point where we are because of Salesforce as a company, as an ecosystem. So being able to help others sort of get to what they want to get to as well through whether it be sharing knowledge through dev groups, user groups, or any of those events. But at the same time, I'm still helping with some of the programs around CTAs or anything like that. So again, we want to achieve our objectives as a company, but we still want to be able to give back and contribute back to the community.
Sure. And you mentioned progression internally for people. So is the plan to have more CTAs from your ranks pushing through, and are you putting together an internal mentoring program around that?
Yeah. Sure. Hashtag no pressure.
Look, most definitely, we've CTA enablement programs currently being put together and in place, and we've already a few team members that some of them maybe will achieve it this year. So we want to most definitely support that, and anybody else that wants to come on board, is passionate enough, that has the right attitude, that they will get that support.
Sure.
I think a lot of it comes out of informal discussions and things that we do as a team, right? When we're working together in projects or any of those things, this mentorship happening there without necessarily you sort of calling that explicitly, right? But at the same time, we want to have a bit more of that formal cadence of coaching and mentoring through, a series of sort of workshops or one-on-one coaching exercises. Yeah.
Okay, and final question. What does Mav3rik look like in 5 years' time?
What does it look like in 2 weeks? Changes so much. We want to be known in the marketplace to really produce quality work. In a couple of years' time, we want to be known in the marketplace of just team members that have come on board and have really advanced their career and really succeeded. So we most definitely want to see that probably in the midterm, not in the long term. And in the long term, just producing quality work and really pushing the boundaries of what we can do in the Salesforce ecosystem.
Yeah, I think size-wise, we're not trying to be a really massive SI, because I think for us, culture is still important.
Sure.
We just want to maintain a good size, good number of people, and still have that really good team culture internally. So, we've got a number or so in mind that we want to just hit and then sort of almost stay that way or keep it that way.
Okay.
Just to be able to have. Maintain the scale and support our engagements, but at the same time not necessarily sacrifice some of those other things that we want to keep.
Sure. Well, you're definitely the ones to watch in the market at the moment, so thank you very much for today, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers, man.
Thanks, man.
Thank you very much.